Hey, how's it going, everybody? Scott Spreitzer here. He's Amal Shaw. We are Against the Spread with Spreitzer and the Shaw, brought to you by DocSports.com. Talking about 7 football games, couple of big college clashes this week, and of course, a couple of big games in the NFL. If there's a point spread on it in the NFL, it's a big game. So there you go. We're going to get to those games in just a minute. Real quick, that banner at the top of your screen, if you're just tuning in for the first time, where it says get a free $60 account, it means just that. If you're not yet a member at DocSports.com, you just click on that link below the video, get yourself set up for a free $60 account. And here's the thing, you can use those free $60 on any of Amal's daily picks or any of my daily picks. It is as simple as that. It's kind of a great way to give DocSports.com a trial run if you're not yet a member. So listen, man, I'm going to kick things off with Alabama, Tennessee here, Amal. I just wanted to ask you before we jump into it, anything you'd like to kick things off with as far as maybe what happened last week and what's going on this week on your homepage over at Doc Sports.
Nothing in particular, but I'll tell you what, the NFL's been good. And, some of these best bets have had some really good opportunities. Had Pittsburgh last week, Scott, and hopefully we cash in again with another big play this weekend.
Yeah, last week was great in the NFL for me. And the top play won with the Bengals Amal, and had to sweat that down to about a minute and a half to go in the game when they ran in that touchdown for the final points on the board. And then, of course, there's a $1:40 to go left in the fourth quarter. And you're going, guys, play some defense. I know you're up 10, but don't give up a touchdown because you're just going to keep everything in front of you and give up 15 yards per pass in the final minute. Thankfully, they did not do that, did not give up the backdoor cover, and we got the win. But all the plays found for Amal and for myself, exclusive at DocSports.com on our handicappers homepages. Of course, our plays in football for the entire weekend are released on Thursday afternoon, so you can check it out, jump on board if you wish to do so. Let's kick things off in the SEC, Amal. It's Alabama and Tennessee doing battle. Bama, I saw them as low as 1.5 in a couple of books early in the week or on Sunday when it opened. And then, of course, it's now up to 3, the total sitting at 56.5. I don't know about you, but the one thing I notice, and I've noticed with Bama, when I see like a team, or especially in college, that has an elite level head coach who's been there for a while, and he leaves and the next guy comes in, and this is nothing against Kalen DeBoer, very good football coach, but that next guy comes in, and with that group of players that was basically brought in by that previous elite level coach, man, you see the fundamentals dropping like crazy, couple of levels. And I've watched Alabama a couple of times this year. I saw them against Georgia. I watched them last week again, almost lose a game, and watched the Vanderbilt game in which they did lose. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, boy, the level of fundamentals at Alabama has already dropped from an A+ to a B. And it's just something that you have to deal with when you bring in a new coach with players that former elite level coach recruited, it seems like.
I'll tell you, Scott, you bring up a really good point. For me, I don't know about the fundamentals have necessarily dissipated, but it's the discipline. You look at the end of the first half in that game against South Carolina, they wind up with a personal foul penalty on a touchback. That would have never happened under Nick Saban. The drive starts at the 12-yard line. Jalen Milroe ends up taking a sack. Then they wind up with a safety. Those are all compounded by the lack of discipline. You never saw. To me, Alabama was with Stanford and the 3 service academies in terms of not getting personal foul penalties. And to your point, there is a changing of the guard in terms of the discipline within that program. And I think you're starting to see it cause a little bit of an issue. But in terms of this game, I find it interesting. Heupel's offense, to me, has been a little bit exposed. They scored 10 points in regulation against the Florida Gators. I don't recall Bob Stoops being on that sideline there for that defensive coordinator job for Florida. This is not the mid-'90s. I'm not sure with this team right now. Look, I don't love Alabama in this particular spot on the road. But the one thing is Tennessee's got to show some consistency. We saw Sam Pittman in Arkansas slow them down. I think even though Alabama's had some issues, think about the second half against Georgia, the game against South Carolina, and the game against in between Vandy as well. Their defense has had issues for the last 10 quarters. I think this could be an intriguing game. I'm not touching this game, Scott. I don't know if you have a strong opinion here, but this one to me feels like an in-play opportunity if somebody can get it. Unfortunately, nothing on the pregame.
Yeah, I certainly think it's a good play for in-game, to keep an eye on and possibly get involved in that way. I look at what Alabama's done. They were almost even in yardage in that game against Georgia, 41-34 win, where they opened up the big lead, then had to come back late in the second half and hold on against the Bulldogs, and got outgained the last 2 weeks, including by about 61 yards against South Carolina. The last 2 weeks, Bama has 188 rushing yards on 3.2 yards per carry. That's it. And then on the flip side, you talked about Heupel. They teed off on Chattanooga, NC State, and Kent, but they played mediocre football of late. 20 points per game against Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Florida, and they're lucky not to be 1-2 in those games. They averaged under 3.6 yards per carry in those games, and all of a sudden, their quarterback Nico, he's completely off the Heisman list now after being near the top of the Heisman list, top 5 or 6, just 3 or 4 weeks ago. All of a sudden, 60% the last 3 games, 174 yards per game through the air, a touchdown, a pick. That's it. I think we're going to see an under in this game, Amal. It's 56.5. Not going to be a premium play for me over at Docs, but I think a lower scoring game than what's projected because I haven't liked what I've seen out of either one of these offenses of late. Once the schedule started getting a little bit tougher for these two teams. Notre Dame and Georgia Tech. Okay, Tech, 11.5-point dog. This game being played in Atlanta, but inside the dome, not on Tech's home field. The total sitting right around 49. Amal, I got to tell you, man, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking I'm ready to make Georgia Tech my best bet for this week, getting all those points. But you've got a situation right now with Haynes King. I've been digging and digging and digging, and I can't find anything other than the coach saying he's day to day. If Haynes King plays, obviously that number could drop if it's announced that he's going to start in this game. The number drops a little bit. I don't know that Tech is going to drop all that far as how they play if Haynes King can't go. But, man, he's been a difference maker so far this 2024 campaign.
He has been the difference for this Georgia Tech offense in my mind. His ability to throw the ball, to run the ball in certain situations, really crucial. He's the Texas A&M transfer. But, Scott, for me, I'm not sure if he's going to be able to go, and they haven't disclosed what the injury is. Remember, he got banged up, goes in the tent, comes out with a baseball cap on. That has a profound impact. I have not been behind this Notre Dame team a lot this year. I just don't believe in them. I know they took care of business very comfortably against Stanford last week. They did a nice job there, but a little bit of inconsistency for me. This team, they blow out Purdue. I know that's not a big deal, but still, they take care of business against Stanford, and then, of course, they have that loss against NIU. I'll tell you this. My gut, nothing to substantiate it. I have a feeling Haynes King is not going to play. Just based on what we saw, game's 11 and a half, and I'll tell you what, from a Georgia Tech perspective, from a Notre Dame perspective, if you like them, take a look at betting the line now because I think it's only going to go up.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, and this is what he's done for this team. He hasn't thrown a pick, talking about Haynes King and what he means if he doesn't go. He hasn't thrown a pick since August 31st. He's got 8 touchdown passes and 1 pick on the entire season. He connects on over 70% of his passes, over 8 yards per pass, and they're so balanced, 240 through the air per game, 204 on the ground per game, and they're tough to run on. But if they don't have that offense moving the football, then I think that defense eventually wears down. Dame's 108 through the air in passing yards per contest, but you need Haynes King to keep Notre Dame's offense off the field. Give your defense a break. So I've gone from originally thinking, boy, if he's healthy, this is my best bet for the show, Georgia Tech plus the points, but you can't risk it. You can't risk it with Haynes King potentially sidelined. Georgia's at Texas, interesting game. The Longhorns laying 5 in this one, total 56. They opened 3. Texas, they got bumped to 4. Wednesday morning around 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. It got bumped to as high as 5.5. Basically, it settled in at 4 at most shops. Listen, the Bulldogs might have issues in the trenches. They got 4 players that have been added to the injury list, 3 on offense up front, 1 on defense, and they're all listed as questionable, and they're all considered undisclosed reasons thus far. And I've been checking with my line service throughout the day as we got ready to do this show, and I didn't find anything new on the 4 guys in the trenches other than questionable. Obviously, that's a big deal. Now, they escaped the Kentucky Wildcats. They were horrible for a half against Bama. Here's the one thing that I actually like in their favor. After that game against Miss State last week, they win 41-31 Georgia. All I kept getting were texts. Oh my gosh, this defense is terrible. Have you seen, Miss State scores 31 on Georgia. I started digging deep right away, of course, like I always tend to do, because I'm thinking if I get 100 texts and 95 of them say one thing, I'm digging in to see why the 5 are likely right. And here's the thing. They led 34-10 at one point against Miss State. It was never in doubt. They outgained Mississippi State 605 to 385. They averaged almost 8 yards per play in that game, did Georgia. So I'm going to give them a break on that final score. The one thing about Texas going into this game, and again, you got to lay 5 here. It's a dead number, but again, it's up from 3.5 as a low in some shops on Sunday, is that Texas has not faced an offense. Not yet. Even Oklahoma. Oklahoma stinks on offense. So this will be their first test if Georgia's healthy up front for the Texas Longhorns defense to see what they can do against the Georgia offense.
I'm not taking anything away from the Longhorns. They're the number one team in the country. I get that. But the reality to me is, what has Texas really done besides have that high preseason ranking? You mentioned it. Oklahoma right now, they're not able to move the ball. They were fortunate to win the game on the Plains with the big defensive touchdown. Hawkins, young freshman, he'll be better, but right now he's just not the guy. And then you look at some of the other opponents. You mentioned Colorado State, not the type of season that they were expected to have. I'm not taking anything away from Texas. Statistically, the number one defense in college football. On the flip side, I've got a lot of concerns about Georgia. It's not just the fact that Alabama moved the ball at will in the first half, got a little bit conservative in the second half. They find a way when they needed to. Notre and Williams were able to deliver. I think Carson Beck's done a really nice job. But this Georgia running game, in my estimation, is not as good as it's been in years past. The other thing you mentioned, the Mississippi State game. That doesn't really alarm me. I thought it was a bad spot for them. You got Texas on the horizon. Just really not the ideal spot. If we're being completely honest, Mississippi State is arguably the worst team in the SEC. And to me, when I look at this Georgia team, outside of Carson Beck, you mentioned the offensive line, they're banged up. The guard is out for a while. He'll be back with an MCL injury there. I just don't have the confidence in this Georgia team right now. Scott, this is a tough one for me to call, but I lean towards the Horns at home. Georgia knows they can win this game. Texas believes they can win this game. That's the distinction for me right now. And at this point in time, I'll side with Texas to win it. I think if you're looking to bet it, I think you'd have to take the +5 because I think it is going to be a tight game. Ewers didn't look great against Oklahoma, and I know Oklahoma's got a good defense. But still, there are pieces where I look at Georgia offensively and I have question marks. They didn't play great against Auburn. They had some opportunities, didn't capitalize on them. So this is more of a stay away spot, but if I were to play it, I'd play the dog here.
Tell you what, last week in the first, quarter and a half of that Oklahoma game, there was a few of us kept texting back and forth about where's Arch? Where's Arch? I mean, Ewers had to shake off the rust, no doubt about it. He finally did, and they went on to the easy win. But again, they will face their here's the thing. I mentioned they're going to face their toughest offensive test yet when it comes to the Georgia offense. And you mentioned, again, the offensive line issues. They're actually 13th in the SEC in rushing yards per game. The Georgia Bulldogs have got to be able to start running the football if they're going to be able to win big games the rest of the season, including this particular contest. And, we saw Kirby Smart last week come that close to having his Woody Hayes moment on the field with a Mississippi State player. And you got to start wondering if the frustration is starting to wear thin on a guy like Kirby Smart also. So that was kind of something to keep an eye on to see if he keeps his cool this week, no matter what happens against Texas. Big Ten clash in Bloomington. We're going to find out which one of these teams is for real in all likelihood. It's Nebraska at Indiana. Indiana laying 6.5, total 50.5. Now, it's funny because before last week, Indiana was a 4-point favorite. Yeah. They've been as high as 7 earlier this week, 6.5 as we speak. So despite the fact that neither team played a football game last week, Amal, we've got a situation where Indiana's gone up 2.5 points from where it was before last week's games. And again, both teams were off a bye. So listen, I think if you look at what Indiana's done, and the big question for me, and I jotted down some notes that I got to make sure I mention them all here. Indiana has all these great offensive metrics, but have played these teams. Northwestern, 114th defending the pass. The Maryland Terrapins, 109th defending the pass. Charlotte, 107th against the pass, 109th against the run. UCLA, 117th against the pass. Florida International, 120th against the run. And Western Illinois, who they hung 77 points against. Every one of those teams aren't even worth mentioning almost because their offenses are so bad, their defenses. So now they finally step up against a team that brings an interior pass rush. And we'll see how Rourke and Indiana's offense reacts to an interior pass rush. They haven't faced one yet.
You're absolutely right. None of these teams are over 500. Northwestern and Maryland are both at 3-3. Charlotte's at 3-3. UCLA has 1 win on the season, the opener against Hawaii. Western Illinois 2-4, as well as FIU. So I'm not really impressed. I'm not taking anything away from the job that Curt Cignetti has done. This team has played extremely well. But at the same time, I would make the argument, sometimes you are who you play. And they haven't played anybody. And to me, Nebraska a little bit more battle-tested. They played a good quarterback in Luke Altmaier. Rourke is a good quarterback, but they've already faced somebody like this. Nebraska, before we came on, you and I were talking about probably should be undefeated here. I like Big Red. Not only do I think Big Red's got a chance to cover this game, I think they're going to win the game outright.
Oh, good stuff. I don't like playing Nebraska or laying points with Nebraska, but if I find a good spot where I can take points, then I'll look to do so. So agree with you there on that one. Let's switch to the NFL. We got some interesting matchups to talk about. The Texans are at Green Bay. Green Bay laying 2.5 to 3. That total sitting at 47.5. Of course, no Nico Collins at wide receiver. That's going to be tough on the Houston Texans passing game. Now, they want to throw the football. I mean, they're top 5 in passing yards per game. Green Bay's a bit leaky when it comes to their pass defense. I mean, even Will Levis threw for 260 against the Packers. Your first thought, or my first thought, I should say, was to play the over, which again is 47.5 all. But without Nico Collins, I'm a little bit hesitant. What are your thoughts on this one?
I agree with you. I have a little bit of a concern for this Houston offense. Last week against New England, different scenario. Didn't have to be great, but they were effective there. The other thing that really concerns me, Scott, if you look at over the last 3 or 4 games, probably 4 games going back, CJ Stroud has struggled in the second half of games. Against Buffalo, wasn't great against the Patriots. Against Jacksonville was okay. They put up some hollow stats against Minnesota. Even against the Bears on that Sunday night game, that's where you really started to see some pitfalls in the second half. Look, he's having a good year, and I know we've already kind of given him his credit for what he did last year, but I want to see some more consistency. Now, Jordan Love on the flip side hasn't played as well as he did last year. His Green Bay team has beaten up on some soft opponents: Tennessee, Indiana, or Indianapolis, Arizona. You look at some of the more challenging teams, Philadelphia, and of course, they lose to Minnesota. I thought, Scott, this was the second toughest game on the board this weekend.
I like the over here a lean. Again, it's not going to be a premium play, and it's because of Collins. But I think that, Houston's been decent enough on offense to take advantage of Green Bay's somewhat leaky defense. So that'll be my opinion for the show, will be the over between Houston and Green Bay. The Lions are at Minnesota. A great match. Minnesota laying 2.5. Look ahead was Minnesota 1. That total sitting at 50. It's hard to quantify how much a defensive player is worth to the number as far as the point spread is concerned, as you know, all. But man, Aiden Hutchinson, such a tough loss for this Lions team. Here's what they are with Hutchinson. He's number 1 in sacks through last week, number 1 in quarterback hits, number 1 in quarterback pressures. Hutchinson had 26 pressures in 5 games already this season before getting hurt last week. And yet the Lions were still 27th against the pass. And I heard this on a non-sports betting show or NFL show Tuesday night or Wednesday morning. They were talking about the fact that all those numbers Hutchinson put up on defense, yet the team gives up like the 5th most passing yards per game. They never dive into it as deep as we do them all when it comes to these non-betting shows. If you look at those yards, they're misleading. Detroit has held opponents to 6.3 yards per pass, pretty good. They've picked off 7 passes. They've given up just 4 touchdowns through the air. That's it, 4 to 7 touchdown to INT ratio allowed. So it is hard to quantify what Hutchinson's pressures are worth to those numbers. I mean, I can remember going back, Troy Polamalu, when we actually had a defensive player who really mattered against the spread. I mean, he was worth a point, in most games for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think it's going to affect them a whole lot here, which kind of tells you where I'm looking as far as this game is concerned. Long term, though, not having Hutchinson, I think, is going to be a bit of a problem for this defense.
I generally think, and this is more of an NBA theory, when you lose a guy like this, the first game, it doesn't affect you as much.
Yep.
I think it's afterwards going forward where you start to see that impact being felt. Look, I'm not taking anything away from Hutchinson. I think this defense as a whole, the other 10 guys are pretty good. I don't think they're getting enough credit. You kind of broke down some of the statistics in terms of where they're at. Hutchinson's got 7 sacks on the season. He had 4.5 in one game.
Yeah,
and to
true.
me, sometimes that's important to look at because it just kind of goes to show you that, hey, look, defensively, they were able to get to the quarterback in that game. I think it was against Tampa. But I still have some concerns with this team. Scott, I don't know who's going to win this game. I favor Detroit, but I'll just tell you on a quick side note, I bet the Minnesota Vikings at a heavy price over 11.5 wins for the season, minus 150. There's some other books you can get at 12.5 if you want it to be at plus 125. But the reason why I took it is, Scott, they've got a stretch during the season in November where they play Indy, Jacksonville, and Tennessee. These guys have to win 7 more games out of 7 more games out of the 10 remaining that they, or the 12 remaining that they have. Math off there a little bit, but I just think the schedule is weak. Even if they lose both games to Detroit, this team is still in pretty good shape. I think people are underestimating this Minnesota team. And one other thing, and I think we talked about it briefly, Minnesota first half. Look at this team. They have dominated the first half of games. They have won all 5 first halves in the games they've played.
Sure. Yeah, I actually like the over in this game. I do think Minnesota will be able to do enough to help push this game over the total against the Hutchinson less Detroit Lions. You made a great point, by the way. If a guy's got 7 sacks, 4.5 came in one game, you got to look and see who he played the rest of the way and that he didn't get to the quarterback. But the pressures do quite add up over the course of the season. The Detroit offense, obviously, they're healthy and it's outstanding. And the Vikings pass defense is 30th in passing yards allowed per game. So I think Detroit's OC, Ben Johnson, can take advantage with a healthy offense. And I know what people are going to say. Okay, Minnesota games have been overpriced as far as the total. The under is 4-1. The Lions are, 2-3 to the over so far this season. But I think this is where the teams combine for enough points to push that over the projected total. Last game we want to talk about before we get to best bets, the Chiefs and the Niners. San Francisco laying 1.5, total 47. This number was picked before last week's games were played. There were as much as 2 in a couple of shops. San Francisco on Sunday night. Now again, a 1 to 1.5 point favorite. And we all know that key record. And if it's going to keep going, Andy Reid off a bye was at 21-4 now straight up, 20-2 if the other team played the previous week. That's the scenario this week, Amal.
I think it bodes well for the Kansas City Chiefs. Look, I know people are not enamored with this Chiefs team because even though they're 5-0, they haven't done it in dominant fashion. It seems like they're in tight football games. You look at it. They win against the Ravens. The score says 7. It would have been a 1-point win if they got it. I mean, it was a half an inch here or there. Ravens would have gone for 2. And then the Bengals, they beat by a point. They beat the Falcons by 5. Finally, they dominated against the Saints. And it really should have been a larger margin than 13 in that one. But to me, Scott, I just can't go against the numbers. Look, I would love to take San Francisco, and normally this would be a good spot for the 49ers. But losing CMC is still a bit of a concern. And then defensively, they haven't been great. Arizona on that last drive just said, we're going to come and run the ball right down your throat. And they did exactly that. The Niners couldn't stop them. I'm going to stay away from this game. I wanted to take San Francisco, but you talked about it. Andy Reid off of a bye. There's few things that are more secure and better in the NFL. I think it's hard to go against that. And I don't know. I think the Chiefs have a decent quarterback.
Well, you get your best bet ready, and I'm going to talk for just a minute. Out of all the games we've talked about, I've got a best bet on one of the games that I'm going to have in just a second. But I want to remind everybody that you can get that free $60 account by clicking on the link below the video. If you're not yet a member over at DocSports.com, great way to give Doc Sports a trial run. I'm all going into this week I'm hitting 68% in college football since September 1st. I had the bad opening week, no doubt about it, and then we kicked it into gear slowly and then got hot. Last week I went 3-1 overall with college and pro, but we ended up profiting because we pushed the 7-star in college and we won the 6-star in the NFL. That got us over the top as far as a profitable weekend in football. But now 19-8 college and pro combined going back to mid-September. So I do have a 7-star this week. I do have a 6-star this week in the NFL, 7-star in college football, and that'll be part of the package, which will likely be around 7 plays. And again, we're talking about this on Wednesday afternoon, and all the plays for all of us at Docs Sports will be released, available for purchase on Thursday afternoon, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. So you can tell everybody what you got going, tell them your best bet, then I'll give my best bet, and we'll wrap this baby up.
Yeah, I'm going to give you one for college football for tomorrow night, and that's going to be the ESPN game. That's BC Virginia Tech. Like Boston College, getting 7.5 here. Castellanos back in the lineup for this team. Look, Virginia Tech's a solid team at 3-3, but they're nothing overwhelming. Boston College has been incredibly competitive. I'm not a big Bill O'Brien fan personality-wise, but I think he's a tremendous coach, and I think this team will be ready. Scott, I think this is one where you can take a shot despite being on the road on the money line with BC. This is a good football team that's been underestimated all year long. We saw it when they beat Florida State, and they've been there against Missouri. They had an opportunity. This team is a solid team. But Virginia Tech shouldn't be laying 7.5. I know they won the game against Miami. Everybody except ACC officials seem to know that. But give me Boston College plus 7.5 on this one. One of the things I love the games we went over in the NFL. You picked literally the 3 hardest games on the board this week, and I love it because I was like, I got no opinion on this. This is tough to call.
Yeah, it's a tough card. I love to talk about games where the the public's really going to be interested in watching and pick those 3 games. And then I started jumping into the handicap of the 3 games, and I'm like, wow, this ain't easy. I do have one of the games we talked about. One of the sides is going to be on my premium card in all likelihood on Thursday afternoon for Sunday's games. For the best bet, and I'll stick with the 7 games we talked about on the show. I'm going to back Nebraska, and I'm not real big at backing Nebraska. Everybody who's watched me all these years knows where I'm from. I'm from Omaha, but I've been out here since I was 17 in Las Vegas, Nevada. So this is my home. But I still do bleed Nebraska, scarlet and cream, if you will. But the bottom line is that I'm going to go with the Huskers here. I will say this, folks. If you did not see the Pat McAfee show on Wednesday afternoon, check it out. The interview with Signetti, the coach for Indiana, terrific interview. He's kind of a hard ass, but kind of not. And what I mean by that is, boy, he's a stickler for details. He's a stickler for players doing what they're supposed to on the practice field. But he also came out and said, we don't have long practices, hour and 30, hour and 40 minutes. We can get done in an hour 40 what most teams get done in 2.5 hours. And I love that, But in this particular game, I think finally stepping up in level of competition. Maybe they win the game, but I think if they do, it'll be by a field goal. I'm a little worried, Husker fans, for those of you who might be watching. I keep thinking that Nebraska's not good enough in the trenches to win or come close or maybe even make a playoff appearance next year. And if Dylan Raiola is thinking that we might not be good enough to compete for a top-notch level next year, he could play wherever he wants. Don't be shocked if this guy transfers in the offseason and ends up at one of the top 5 or 6 teams in college football that seem to have a perennial lock on playoffs or playoff contention. That worries me as a Husker fan. But throwing that aside for now, I'll say Nebraska plus the points for my best bet. Amal, enjoy doing these shows with you, man. Let's keep doing them every week throughout the Super Bowl. Obviously, we'll have a lot of props moving forward. I mean, the season's already halfway over, basically, in college. So we'll be talking a lot of NFL and props as the season progresses. He's Amal Shah. I'm Scott Spreitzer. We are Against the Spread, brought to you by DocSports.com. Let's put them in the win column, everybody.